Revelation chapter 5, continuing on. In our study of the book of the Revelation, now Revelation chapter 5, we noted last week, while it is still the same setting as chapter 4, there is a transition that takes place as far as the emphasis. In chapter 4, we see that God is the creator. He made all things. And as his creation, we were created for his pleasure. And so that should always be the first priority. Whenever we're thinking about doing something, whether it be a job, whether it be a purchase, really when it comes down to it, even when we sit down to eat a meal, is this pleasing to the Lord? Is this activity? Is this something that I can do, and on the day of judgment, I'm going to stand before Christ and say, could you imagine Paul? He said, I am free from the blood of all men. Could you imagine living your life in such a way? You know what that means? That means every single person he came in contact with, he didn't leave them without giving them an opportunity with the gospel. That's just insane to think about, because we do not live our lives that way. But that's exactly what Paul did. And the reason he did that, and the reason he was able to do that, is because he did it intentionally, as we talked about a little bit briefly on Sunday. But in chapter 5, we come now to see the emphasis as God being the Redeemer and the King through the person of Jesus Christ. Chapter 5, now in chapter 4, John couldn't see any of the physical distinctions of the one sitting on the throne. He just saw an extremely bright light, the God's holiness radiating from the throne. But now as we come into chapter 5, some of those distinctions are going to be made known and be seen. But what we find in chapter 5 going on is the preparation of heaven for the day of the Lord, the day of God's judgment upon this earth. And so chapter 5 is going to establish the right that Jesus Christ has to judge this world as he's going to. Now, if we look at verse number 1, John says, "And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within, and on the backside sealed with 7 seals." And so we talked about the 7-sealed scroll. It is by the opening of this 7-sealed scroll, the 7-sealed scroll being the title deed to the earth, it's by the opening of each of these seals that he takes back the earth for himself. It is going to be through the opening up of these seals that he reclaims and that he, in essence, prepares the world for the kingdom age. He is going to cast down every single power, every single authority. The kingdoms of this world are going to become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he is going to reign on the throne, the Bible tells us. Now, we looked at Jeremiah 32 last week in reference to this title deed, because it says that this book, this scroll that John sees, is written within or on the inside of it, and it's written on the backside or on the outside of this scroll as well. It's not just on the inside. And the reason that would be is because a title deed, land property, was written, the deed itself, the proof of purchase, was written on the inside. Then it was rolled up, sealed, and then, especially since it's a legal document, it would have 7 seals because 7 people were required to witness it in the Roman world. And then on the back side of it, they would write down the requirements for opening those seals. Who gets to open this book, in essence? Who gets to claim this purchase? And so that's what is being seen there in Jeremiah 32. Jeremiah buys a piece of land, goes through this exact same process, and he's getting ready to leave Israel, and he's going to die before the Jews come back to the land. So why is he buying this land? He takes this proof of purchase, has it put in a jar, buried in the field that he purchased, with the intention that the people are going to come back to the nation of Israel, and that somebody is going to dig that up and be able to meet the requirements and to claim the land. And that is what is being pictured here in Revelation chapter 5. That's why someone is going to come back. Someone is going to come. They are going to claim the land for themselves because they meet the requirements. Now, initially, mighty angel asked, who is worthy to open the book? And no one's found. And so John begins to sob. He begins to wail out loud because he understands this is the title deed to the earth. And if nobody is found worthy, then who is going to take care of this mess? That means this world's just going to go on and eventually destroy itself. It's kind of how it looks today, doesn't it? We look at everything that is going on. And, presidential election that's coming up, the COVID virus, now the bubonic plague is becoming an issue again. That's been gone for hundreds of years. And there's all these things going on, and we see the world is getting prepared, exactly like Matthew 24 says. These are things that are going to be taking place on a global scale during the tribulation period. The world is getting set up for it. Now, if nobody was going to come back and take control of this thing, this is all the better it's going to ever get. Where we're at now, it would only get worse from here, but we know that one day Jesus Christ is going to come, and that's the point here, because when we get to verse number 5, notice, he says, "And one of the elders saith unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the seals thereof." And then I also want you to notice verse number 6. It says, "And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth." And we'll get more into verse number 6 next week, but I wanted to point something out. There are 4 requirements for reclaiming land ownership, for redeeming the land. So the 4 requirements is the person had to be near kin. They had to be of the right family in order to do so. They had to be able to meet the requirements, the rest of the requirements. They had to be willing to take the land and to work it and to be willing to redeem it back. And they also had to take upon themselves all the legal requirements that went along with having that land. And so what we see, though, in these 2 verses is it explains that Jesus Christ meets all 4 of those requirements. If you notice, it says that he's the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, which shows that he's near kin, he's of the right family. He has prevailed to open the book. He is the one that overcame. That means that he is the one that is able to open it. He is willing because he went as a lamb to the slaughter, and he assumed all the legal requirements for the land because he was slain as a lamb. He took our sin upon himself and was slain. So Jesus meets all this. This is the purpose of Revelation chapter number 5, is to show that Jesus Christ is the one who has prevailed. He is the one that meets all the legal requirements in order to claim the earth back for himself. That's what's going on here. He died. He rose again. He conquered death. He conquered the grave. He overcame. He destroyed the power of Satan. He destroyed the works of the devil. And he's going to come and judge in righteousness. And he's going to take control of this world for himself. Now, there's 2 titles that are used here in verse number 5 that refer to Christ's second coming, when he actually does come to take the throne. In verse number 6, he is called the Lamb that was slain. And that is a reference to his first coming. When Jesus Christ was here on the earth, he came as the Lamb of God to take away the sin of the world. He came, he died for our sin, he rose again. But at his second coming, he is going to come back like a lion and a powerful king. I like what Joel 3 says. It says that he will roar out of Zion, and the heaven and the earth shall shake. Can you imagine what that's going to be like on that day when he comes back? The mighty roar of a lion that's going to take place, and the heavens and the earth are going to shake on that day when he descends. Now, the 2 titles that are given, both of them have a lot of biblical significance. This is what we're going to look at tonight. And both of them are actually quite miraculous to think about. So let's look at this first one. The Lion of the tribe of Judah. Go with me to Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49. This is where this idea originated. This is where this title begins. Genesis chapter 49, and this is where Jacob is blessing his sons. In verse number 8, he comes to Judah. It says, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. Now notice this. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion. That's referring to the strength of the young lion. This is the strength that Judah is going to have. And as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? So this has to do with his being immovable, steadfast. Who's going to rouse him up? Now notice, he says, verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. That scepter refers to kingly authority. That will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So at this very moment, what is going on is Judah is established as a royal line. This is where the authority is going to come from. This is where a lawgiver is going to come from. This is where the king is going to come from. It was always God's intention to give Israel a king. You know, we look at the idea of there in Samuel when Saul becomes the king. They just got to jump on it. God had every intention of giving them a king. That's why he gives instruction in the law regarding a king, that he's not to multiply horses and wives, and he's supposed to write out the entire book of the law so he has it before his eyes. And so God was going to give Israel a king, but David was supposed to be the first king. They just kind of jumped the gun and went out of the will of God and took the wrong king. But it was always God's purpose to give them a king, and it was going to be through the line of Judah. Now, verse 10 is the key. It's the scepter that shall not depart. It's the symbol of his kingly authority. In Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 8, speaking of Christ, thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of thy kingdom. So when Jesus comes, how is he going to reign? He is going to reign in righteousness. And this was going to continue until Shiloh come. Shiloh was the place wherever the glory of God rested. Here it means the peaceful one. It was a messianic title referring to Jesus Christ. So the idea is that there is going to be a scepter that would not depart from Judah. The royal authority would always be in Judah. There would always be a lawgiver between his feet until the Messiah comes. He was going to be the final one. He was going to be the last king and lawgiver to come. So Judah was going to have the line of rulers until Messiah. But this really becomes an issue in the days of Jesus. Remember in the book of Luke, Jesus at 12 years old, he's in the temple during the Passover. It's really significant what is going on at that period of time in history. Because at that exact same time, now you remember, Israel has been conquered. Israel, from the time they go down to Babylon, never had their own complete autonomous authority. They were always under the authority of a Gentile power. There was somebody ruling over them. At that time, they're under the authority of Rome. And at that time, when Jesus was 12 years old, the Romans had issued a decree declaring that the Jewish people could no longer carry out capital punishment. And this was a very big deal because the rabbis believed that the capital punishment was the cornerstone of government as defined by the Noahic covenant. Remember, Noah gets off the ark. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. God establishes government at that time. And so when they were denied that fundamental right of government, the rabbis all rushed to the streets. In fact, it's said that the entire city of Jerusalem was filled with wailing because the rabbis were in the streets wailing and beating upon their breasts and rending their clothes because this was the last bit of authority that they had. They believed that the scepter now had departed from Judah. The authority has now been completely taken away, and Messiah is not here yet. But what was going on at that very same time, Jesus is in Jerusalem. His mom and dad had left. Jesus is in Jerusalem, and where is he? All the teachers are there asking him questions at 12 years old. So while they looked at it as though the scepter had departed from Judah, actually Shiloh had indeed come. Their Messiah had come, and he was there in their midst. Now it's interesting that it's only Luke that records that instance. And what's also interesting is that Luke in his genealogy, and this will be significant in just a moment, but Luke in his genealogy records the genealogy of Mary. See, when we look at Matthew, we have, and if you're paying attention when you're reading, you notice the names are only identical in this genealogy up to so far, and then all of a sudden you get two different groupings of names. And it's like, well, is this a contradiction or what's going on? Well, Matthew gives the line of Joseph. Luke gives the line of Mary. And that's going to be significant in just a moment. But they thought that the scepter had indeed departed, but yet all the while the scepter was actually in their midst. The Lion of the tribe of Judah had come. Now, the second title that Jesus is given there in Revelation chapter 5, verse 5, is that he is the root of David. And this is really kind of an unusual concept. It's not something that we see. And this is why this is miraculous. And it's actually a reference somewhat to the virgin birth of Christ. Let's go to the book of Isaiah. We're going to look at a couple portions of Scripture, and then we'll be done. But in Isaiah chapter number 11, this is where this messianic title comes from. But in Isaiah chapter 11, verse number 1, it says, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of the eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears, but with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them." Could you imagine what that's going to be like? I can't imagine seeing Sammy with a leash around a lion. Just pulling him along. Well, I mean, yeah, I can. I guess I can see that. And not having to worry about it. But that's what this is going to be like when Christ comes. It's going to radically change everything when he comes. Notice verse 7, it says, "And the cow and the bear shall feed. Their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. And the sucking child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." Now notice verse 10, "And in that day there shall a root of Jesse, shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious." So this is the idea where we get the root of David. So David comes from Jesse. That's going to be the royal line. David is of the tribe of Judah. Now something interesting happens, but when we look at Isaiah 11:1, let me define a couple words here. The word rod is referring to a twig or a branch. And the idea of the stem here is not like we typically think of, like a little small branch maybe coming off of, a little small twig coming off a branch or something. But the stem refers to a trunk of the tree that's been cut down. So you take a tree, cut it down as level as you can with the ground, right down to the very root system. This is what's being spoken of here. And so what is going to happen is that from this trunk where it's been cut off, a branch is going to shoot out and another tree is going to begin to grow. Well, that doesn't happen. At least not often. Maybe somewhere it's happened. But it's been cut down, the life has been cut off, but now all of a sudden this branch is going to come and a new growth is going to begin to start from this trunk of a tree. Now this is the idea that's given to us in Revelation chapter 5 when it speaks of the root of David. Is that not that he is actually the root itself, but he is David is the root that he is springing from. How is this going to happen? If you look at Jeremiah 22, we're in Isaiah, look over to Jeremiah. This is going to become an issue. Because in Jeremiah chapter 22, something is going to happen in David's line. About 13 generations later, something is going to happen in David's line. Jeremiah 22, beginning with verse number 24, God says, "As I live, saith the Lord, though Coniah or Jeconiah or Jehoiakim," those are the three names that refer to the same person, "the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in essence he's saying, though he were the signet of my right hand, yet would I pluck thee thence." So he absolutely detests Coniah. Because in essence what he's saying, he says, if you were the signet of my right hand, if you were the basis of my authority, the proof of my authority, he says, I would still get rid of you. And that's pretty powerful language. And so he says, verse 25, "And I will give thee into the hand of them that seek thy life," talking about the Babylonians, "and into the hand of those whose face thou fearest, even into the hand of Nebuchadrezzar, king of Babylon, and to the hand of the Chaldeans. And I will cast thee out and thy mother that bare thee into another country, where they were not born, and there shall ye die. But to the land whereunto they desire to return, thither shall they not return. Is this man Coniah a despised, broken idol? Is he a vessel wherein is no pleasure? Wherefore are they cast out, he and his seed, and are cast into a land which they know not?" Now, listen, he's going to call the entire earth to bear record on what he's about to say. He's calling all the earth together as a witness. "O earth, 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 hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, write ye this man childless." Now, when it says, and he explains this at the end of the verse, but this does not mean that he will never have a child again, because Joseph is a great, however many, grandson of Jeconiah, of Coniah. But notice what he says here, "a man that shall not prosper in his days," and this is what he means by writing him childless, "for no man of his seed shall prosper, sitting upon the throne of David and ruling any more in Judah." So now this is a problem, because the scepter is not to depart from Judah, but now this kingly line from David is now cut off. There will never be another descendant of David that is going to sit on the throne from this line. Now if you go over to chapter 23 of Jeremiah, and verse number 8, we get really kind of a different story. And so we kind of got to wonder, how in the world is this going to happen? Because he says in chapter 23, verse number 5, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name whereby he shall be called, the Lord our righteousness. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that they shall no more say, The Lord liveth, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt." Which, that was a big deal. That was always the way God dealt with his people. Look, I brought you out of the land of Egypt. But now he's saying there's a day coming when something even bigger is going to take place, an even bigger miracle, not bringing you out of the land of Egypt. But notice verse 8, but the Lord liveth, which brought up and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country and from all countries whither I had driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. So when this righteous branch comes, when the Lord our righteousness comes, he's going to gather all of Israel from all the countries of the world back together. So how's this going to happen? Because Jeconiah and his descendants will no longer have the throne. Now, if you pay attention, as I said a moment ago, in Matthew's gospel, we have the genealogy of Jesus down through Joseph, David's great 13 times grandson, Jeconiah, and then from him down to Joseph. Now, here's the question. Was Joseph Jesus' father? Go ahead and answer. It's not a trick question. No. Legally, he was his father. His stepdad, but not biologically. But Matthew goes from David's son Solomon. That's the genealogy. But in Luke chapter 3 and verse 31, the genealogy splits from David through his son Nathan down to a man named Heli, and this man had no sons. He only had a son by marriage, and that son was Joseph. It was a son-in-law. But his daughter was named Mary. That's why Mary's name doesn't appear in the genealogy, and Joseph's name appears in the genealogy. He was adopted in, and we've talked about all that adoption stuff before. We won't do it now. So what in essence is being spoken of here, and I'm finishing up, but is that tree was cut down with Coniah, that stem. It was cut down to the roots. It's not going to grow anymore from there. But something miraculous is going to take place, is that God is going to cause a righteous branch to shoot out from this. A new growth is going to take place. And that's what one of the reasons Jesus had to be born of a virgin is because he couldn't be in the line of Joseph biologically, because that line, no man would sit on the throne. And so it would be kind of a self-defeating prophecy. So he had to be virgin born and come through Mary's line. But let me just give you a thought here. God is never caught off guard. Let's just make a real quick application. He's never caught off guard. Everything that happens, God already knew was going to happen. And he's never scrambling around trying to figure out, how are we going to fix this? You and I do that, don't we? We get sideswiped with something. We get T-boned or whatever you want to call it. Something tragic comes into our life, or something doesn't go quite the way that we want to, and it's like, oh my word, what are we going to do? And so what do? We scramble around trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to fix this? This doesn't make sense. I can't figure out all this. God's already got it figured out. And we can always trust him. In fact, Isaiah 46, 9-11 says this, remember the former days of old, for I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning. And from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will do all my pleasure. Verse 11 says, yea, I have spoken it, I also will bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I will also do it. Before anything ever comes into our life, God already has it figured out. He already knows the end. Before the beginning even started, he had it all figured out. And so we can always trust him. And when we look at this is a pretty big deal. Jeconiah's seed is cut off from being able to go on the throne. But God already had it figured out what he was going to do. He already knew. He already had it all planned out. In fact, you could even go through and you could even probably bring it down to say, this is exactly how God had it planned from the very beginning. I'm going to do something totally miraculous that doesn't make sense to anybody else but him. And that's the way God works all the time. and we can always trust him. Let's pray. Father, thank